So welcome everyone to our Qumulo OpenMetrics API webinar. My name is Joe Custom Solutions Architect with Qumulo. I'm joined today by Porter Smith, who's one of our developers that did a lot of the work that you're going to see today. And we have Billy Hatcher, our customer success manager, that's moderating today's presentation. And I forgot to add Mandy Evans to the slide, but she's also here to help out with the presentation. So we have a question and answer box where you can type in your questions, and Billy, Mandy will keep an eye on the questions, and if we can answer the questions, we'll stop the presentation, answer them as required, but we will have a Q&A section at the end. We will have a hands-on demo of actually how to get this configured. So if you happen to have your Docker instance already ready to go, you should be able to follow along. If not, we can always connect later. We can jump in and help you get this thing configured. So let me disable my camera right here because it's kind of distracting. So the agenda for today, we're going to give an OpenMetrics overview of what it is and what it does and why should we care. We will talk about the types of metrics that are available via our API. We will cover some details about Qumulo's own OpenMetrics API specification, and then how to use the OpenMetrics API. We're going to create a service account and an access token so we can access this information. And then we will run a hands-on guide to configuring the Qumulo Monitoring Dashboard, which is a project that we published on GitHub that allows you to actually visualize all this stuff and collect all this data in your own environment. And we'll talk a little bit about customizing the dashboards so you get to see the data that you are interested in. And then we'll do a little quick Q&A session at the end. So at the end of this presentation, you will see how to configure something like this, where you would have all this information that is completely customizable, and you can keep an eye on what's going on with your clusters. And you have historical data where you can go back in time and see exactly what happened with your system, which is pretty neat. So what is OpenMetrics? OpenMetrics is an open standard format for transmitting a set of metrics as plain text. It is supported by most modern monitoring platforms. It can include a set of labels for each metric, meaning that each metric comes in can actually have sub-metrics and information inside of a general sort of category of metrics. And it defines several different metric types. There's things called like counters and gauges and histograms and just informational bits of data. We can delve into each one of these a little bit when we build custom dashboards, but it's just nice to know overall with the type of data bits that you get through the OpenMetrics API. So why did Qumulo choose OpenMetrics? Now, OpenMetrics is a modern and open standard, and it's designed for today's environments. It's under active development, and there's growing support base of different applications out there that can speak to an OpenMetrics API and collect and present this information. It's also much easier to use and implement than things like SNMP. If you ever had to delve through the SNMP protocol spec, you know it's quite dense and it's really not human friendly at all. So OpenMetrics is kind of meant as a modern replacement for things like SNMP. So what kind of metrics are available? We have two broad categories of metrics that the Qumulo API will send to your monitoring system. We have high-level cluster metrics, which show you things such as protocol operation and latency. Will tell you the number of connected clients, for example. Will tell you information about the cluster, such as the name of the cluster and version. And then we have low-level node metrics, which show you things like the health of the hardware, statistics of the network. Like, do I have a dead drive? Am I dropping a lot of packets? Do I have a lot of network errors? And it shows you if a node is offline. Each one of these categories has many, many more different metrics that are available. So here's a sample that you can get yourself of the data that is available through OpenMetrics in Qumulo. Now, support for the OpenMetrics API was added in version 5.3.0 and above. So this next step here, if you want to follow along, this is not going to work if your cluster is not running this version and above. So if you go into our QQ CLI and you run this command, QQmetrics_get, you get an output of a bunch of text that has your data, and you have some keys and you have some values that get outputted. This is a very abbreviated version of what gets sent. But this is basically the information that is being sent to your monitoring system through the API. And you get to see it's actually quite easy to read. It's very easy to understand what each one of these key value pairs here provide for you. Now, our Qumulo OpenMetrics API is fully documented at this link here. We're going to make all these links available to you later. But let me give you a brief overview of what that looks like here. Let me go back a bit. Oh, I'm losing my thing here. Where's my browser? So if we take a look at the Open API metric specification, you get to see that we have all the different metrics and all their different subkeys, and it's all really well documented. And there's quite a bit of information that you can collect here. So now I'll let Porter take over. And we'll go through some of the basics of what's required for you to use the OpenMetrics API yourself.
All right, thank you, Joe. Yes, so I'm Porter. I was an engineer who worked on this project, and I'll be talking about using the Qumulo OpenMetrics API. So Joe showed how you can use the QQ command line to get that text-based representation of metrics. But of course, that's like a very limited view. That just gives you one point in time of all of those metrics with no history or ability to visualize them. And the real power of metrics comes from being able to see trends over time and alert when things change. And for that, you need a monitoring system. There's a lot of compatible open monitoring systems with OpenMetrics, such as Prometheus or Datadog or Logic Monitor are just some examples. And in addition, you'll need some visualization tool. Some of those monitoring systems come with visualization tools. For Prometheus, that's just kind of the data gathering database part of it. So you'll need something like Grafana to go on top of that to actually display your metrics. In addition, on the Qumulo side, you'll need a user account that has the correct access to the API to be able to gather those metrics. And then if you're using our pre-configured monitoring dashboard, you'll want a Docker host to run the package that contains Prometheus and Grafana. So in order to set up that user account, we'll need to generate an access token for that user. So an access token, unlike a session token that you would get when you log in via the web UI or the QQ CLI, an access token actually lasts indefinitely. So you don't have the problem of, you log in and then after a couple hours, your session expires and now your monitoring system can no longer access the Qumulo API. So these will last basically indefinitely unless you set an explicit expiration. These will let your monitoring system query the Qumulo API. And we recommend creating a dedicated service account due to the fact that these access tokens don't expire. You don't want to be using a user account as your service account, because if that access token leaks, you can kind of think of that as a password, right? Yeah, you want to set this up for a local user account or an AD domain account, and you just have to set it up on the cluster that you want to access and generate an access token. And you want that account to only have just enough rights to be able to access the metrics API, so you're not putting any other data at risk. And then in order to configure the monitoring system to use our API, there's a few things that you need to set up. Of course, this is different for each monitoring system, but the general things that you need are the cluster's host name on port 8000, the API endpoint for accessing metrics, which is that v2 metrics endpoint's default data, the service account token that we just generated, and you'll want to set a polling interval. Generally, 15 seconds to 1 minute is a generally accepted good interval. You can certainly go higher or lower than that, though. All right, and then I'll be going on through a hands-on demo of setting up our Qumulo Monitoring Dashboard. There's a link to this here, and I think we'll be sending out a link after. And this is just a pre-packaged Prometheus plus Grafana Docker container with some pre-filled out configs to like really help you get it set up for your Qumulo quickly. So let me show off that. Here is our GitHub page, and from here we have a whole set of steps that let you like really quickly get this online. And so I'll kind of go through what those look like, how to get everything set up on the Qumulo side, and then how to get that information into the configuration so you can get this online. So I have my cluster here, and first thing I need to do is set up that service account. So I'm going to log in. And I'm going to go create a new user. So I'll go to local users and groups, create a new user, username, metrics. And the password here doesn't really matter because we won't be logging into this, logging in as this user using a password. Instead, we're going to be generating the access token for it. So now with that metrics user generated, we can go create a role to give that user access to the metrics API. So I'll create my new role called metrics API. And we will want to give it the metrics read privilege and only the metrics read privilege. And now we can add metrics to this metrics API role. And now this user has the ability to access the metrics API. The next thing we need is to generate an access token for metrics. And we can only do that via QQ. So I will bring up this terminal that is logged into this cluster. You can do this via QQ locally if you have the tools installed, or you can SSH into your cluster as well. So let me log in. And we'll be using auth create access token, which just takes the name of the user to create an access token for. And then we get back this these two pieces of data. This first piece right here is your access token, and this is only ever given to you when you create the token. So if I were to close this window or otherwise lose access to this piece of text right here, there would be no way to get it back, and I'd have to generate a new one. You can think about this exactly as a password. So having access to this token will give anyone who has this token access to the API as that user, which is why it's important that we only set up a very limited set of rights for that user. Okay, now that we have this access token, we can go plug it into the monitoring project. So I have already downloaded that Qumulo Monitoring Dashboard project. And what we're going to be editing is the Prometheus config. So that lives in Prometheus/Prometheus.yml. And if I open that up, there's some bits for us to fill out here. There's already some things set up, such as the scrape interval. But what we're going to be editing is this first job. So first thing to put in there is the DNS name, or the host name of our cluster at port 8000. So this one is math19. This is just a node in our lab that I have set up for this demo, and then setting up the access token here. So let me copy that access token that I generated in. Right, so this tells it where to access the API, and this tells it how to authenticate. And then just because I don't actually have an SSL cert set for this one, I'll need to turn off TLS verify. But that's all.
Before you save it, Porter, can you talk a little bit about the scrape interval and the timeout?
Yeah. So the scrape interval is the interval that it pulls the API here. So every 15 seconds, it's going to be accessing that API, getting the full set of metrics, and then storing it in its database. So this is kind of the granularity that you'll have of metrics here. So we'll have points down to every 15 seconds. The scrape timeout is for when the metrics API is inaccessible. How long does it wait trying to access the API before it gives up? You'll generally want that to be less than your scrape interval. 10 seconds is like a pretty reasonable default. And at the bottom of this config, we have a different job here for Prometheus. This is for actually Prometheus monitoring itself, just so that you can get a little bit more debug information within this project.
And to clarify a little bit, this configuration file is part of the stuff you grab from GitHub from us when you clone the GitHub project onto your Linux host. Ideally, your Linux, it could be really anything that can run Docker, but you run this on your Linux host, and then you're going to see the next step here. But just to be clear, this file is on your Linux host that it will be your Docker host.
Yes, exactly. All right. And so with that set up, we can actually run the Docker project. So if we type docker compose up, we'll see all of this text telling us that it is starting up, and we can go access these via localhost 9090 to access Prometheus, and log in here. And all of these default username passwords to access these things are in the GitHub README. So I'm just kind of breezing by it, but there's a lot of information in there, very in-depth set of steps in there. So we can see inside of Prometheus, we have our Qumulo cluster that is pointed to the correct endpoint. It is up, and there's no errors. It was able to scrape. Everything looks good here. So Prometheus is the monitoring system. It is like essentially a database, right? So this is reaching out to our Qumulo cluster. It's grabbing those metrics and it's storing them such that they can be queried later. So if I go over and I type in some metric here, so like Qumulo, what we have CPU temperature Celsius, right? And I query this. we can see that, yeah, so this node is at 34 degrees Celsius for its CPU. And if we graph it, this won't be too interesting since we only just started scraping data, but it is at a consistent 34 degrees Celsius. And yeah, so this is the Prometheus side of it. I'm going to pass this back to Joe to show off a more full demo from the Grafana side with some pre-baked clusters that we have.
So most of the time, you're not going to spend a lot of time in Prometheus. You actually, if everything works from your configuration file, you never actually have to log into Prometheus at all. But you would go in here just to verify that data is being collected, because all the exciting stuff will happen in Grafana, as we'll show you in a second here. But going into Prometheus and remembering that it's going to be your Docker host's URL on port 9090. You log in there. The login info is on our GitHub page as admin for this guy here. But if you go into status again, please, and targets, if for some reason stuff is not showing up with Grafana, you can pop in here real quick and take a look at errors. You know, is Prometheus not able to use the API? Is it getting declined because maybe our access key is wrong or expired or what have you? But the rest of the time, you're really not going to be going into Prometheus a whole lot. So just understand that Prometheus is kind of a key element. It sits in the background collecting the data at the interval that you defined. So let me pop in on my end again. And now, once we're done, you log into Grafana. Now Grafana is on the same URL of your Docker host, but on port 3000. And you go in and you log in. And once you are inside of Grafana, you can actually create multiple accounts. You can create different logins for different users. You can have people come in and log in and not blow anything up, and you can have just a single admin account. But in this case, this is what you end up seeing. So I have a number of clusters that I went through the process of setting up. And as a matter of fact, I am going to pop up a terminal real quick because I want to show you how you end up adding multiple clusters on there. So I'm going to pop into my Docker host here. Oh, wrong user. That one. Qumulo at. All right, good deal. So I'm in there. And if you see on this directory, our entire GitHub project is inside of that Qumulo Monitoring Dashboard directory. I pop into that sucker. And in there is a Prometheus directory that has a single file, which is the YAML file that Porter just edited. So if I pop this guy open here, you see I have multiple clusters configured. What you want to do if you want to add a second cluster is that you want to grab everything starting with this, if you're familiar with the way YAML is configured, you know that these are sometimes called stanzas. We would just copy this particular stanza here from this job name down to skip verify. And you make a copy of this and you give it a unique name and you point it to your other clusters. Make sure you don't delete the 8000. This is important. That is right there. You don't really need to change anything else except that you then add the same, you add an access token that works on this cluster. You know, obviously the access token that I use on this guy here does not work on this other cluster. So once you do that, you would reload the Docker instance. And which we have the documentation for doing that on our GitHub page. Pretty easy, just reload and boom, off you go. Now you have new clusters showing up. Now, the cool thing is that Prometheus hangs on to this information. So even if for some reason you change that, you delete one of the clusters, if you add the cluster again to that configuration, that database is still there and the graphs will start loading up again. So just quick overview of the types of information that you can monitor in Grafana. What I have here is my primary dashboard that shows me cluster information like the protocol latencies and how much data and how many people are connected to the cluster. And then I also have the cluster overview. The cluster overview will show me the different data about the actual, let me go back to my dashboards, browse, discard that. And I am going to go to node overview. That's what I want. So this guy here will show me information about the actual hardware. So I get to see the status of my nodes. I have a 5-node cluster. All nodes are online. The time is in sync. I have some general information about the cluster here, like a version of the code is running, the UUID, historical temperatures, fan speeds, drive information. Now, what really gets interesting with this is that I can go back in time and see a historical representation of this information. And I can set a custom time range. I can take a look at the last 7 days. Did I have some temperature spikes? Is anything that really kind of stands out for me? Do I need to worry about some unusual event where my temperatures went up? Did I have a growing number of errors coming up? There's, you know, so it's pretty cool to look this in a historical context. And let me go back to cluster overview. And I can go through my different clusters. So this particular one has more interesting information because it's a natural cluster in our lab that's always under some kind of load. And again, I can take a look historically. I can see what the last date looked like. I can see whether or not it was creating different snapshots. So what you see when you first load this is the different little panels that we decided to create for you. Now, these are completely customizable. We can look at them at a different way. So if I look at the snapshot count here, I can click the edit button. And what you see here is the type of query that was performed against the Prometheus database. And I have some different visualization methods too. This is where it gets really cool, where I can kind of click on this corner here and I can change how I looked at this info. So there's different ways for you to take a look at this information. In this case, time series seems to work well enough for this. I'm going to discard that. But if you already have this up and running in your environment, you might notice that these 3 panels here are not present out of the box. I just took this, some of these other panels, and I kind of made my own visualization of it. So I can take a look at, let's say, I'm going to take a look at latency here. So I would duplicate this guy. So I'm going to go to more. I'm going to duplicate this panel. I'm just going to drag it up there because you can position these wherever you want. Then I'm going to go to edit. And let's say, well, what kind of latency am I really interested in? So I have the actual metric. So all this is coming from the Prometheus database. So these are all the metrics that Prometheus has seen through the OpenMetrics API. And I can make, I can choose one of these metrics types over here. But right now, this is already in there. It's collecting Qumulo protocol operation latency seconds, and instance cluster just kind of isolates it to this cluster itself. Now I'm going to add a new filter, and I want the data type to be metadata, so I can see metadata latency. Actually, let me make it more interesting here. IO type equals read. and I can hit the run queries button, and you get to see that I have just the reads of the different protocols. And I should be able to add protocol is NFS. So now I'm only looking at the latency of NFS read operations, and I run the query right there. So that doesn't look super interesting. So I'm going to make it a kind of dashboard like this. Is kind of maybe a cooler looking info presentation method. Again, I can choose a gauge. The gauges are always cool, but I'm going to leave that one up there. And now I'm going to apply. And you see I have my panel up there. So now that I look at this, I can size it so it fits my thing a little bit better. Let me grab the right corner here. Come on. All right, let me make it a little bit smaller. And I'll put it right next to that. So, oh, this doesn't like snapping in there. Oh well. In any case, you get to see what that how it's really quick and easy to make your own dashboards. Now, our intent on this webinar is not to make you all Grafana experts, but you get to see it's actually pretty easy to get this information and present it. And if you want to make a new panel, you just click on Add Panel up there, and you get to see the different types of metrics are up there. Again, if we take a look at our OpenMetrics API, if you spend a little bit of time actually reading this type of the type of information that's available, there's quite a bit of data that you can collect. So disk transport errors might be interesting if you want to monitor to see, okay, am I getting disk errors? I believe we'll actually have a dashboard for this, but you get an idea of all the different info that you can monitor. And so do we have any questions, Billy, coming up?
So one of the questions we had privately was asking around how much data does this all generate?
Yeah, I can take that. It depends on what monitoring system you're using, and it depends on what protocols you use, and kind of what how much these values are changing. Because a lot of times these systems will compress that data down if stuff doesn't change very often. But we found like a good estimate is about 100 megabytes per node for storing it for 15 days. And you can kind of do the math if you want to store that data longer, or if you have you know, a larger cluster, that should be about the data usage of some kind of system like this.
And the polling period, again, you see this updates roughly every 15 seconds because that's what we set on the Prometheus configuration file.
Yeah, so polling more frequently would also store more data.
And Porter, I think you touched on it a little bit on the last one here, but if someone was curious about how long they could save the data for.
Yeah, so by default in Prometheus, it saves that data for 15 days. You can configure that in that prometheus.yml file. But in general, 15 to 30 days is a pretty normal kind of like default amount of time to save this kind of stuff for. But if you need to save things longer, you know, absolutely can.
Where would you configure that?
In the Prometheus YML file, I would consult the Prometheus documentation for exactly what to put in here. I don't think it actually.
It's not in there, so we would add a new.
Yeah, there would be something to add in there. I would consult the Prometheus documentation for that.
Cool.
Thanks. Looks like we have a question in the Q&A asking about what about alerting for drive failure, node failures?
Yeah, Joe, would you like to go over to the alerting panel in in Grafana?
Mhm.
So in this project, we actually have some alerts set up already. Yeah, if you could just go there and expand the Qumulo section. We have alerts set up for a lot of these hardware failures. So temperature too high, disk endurance low, disk unhealthy, kind of a lot of the stuff that is unambiguous to alert on. But certainly these give you a good, kind of framework for making your own alerts if you have more specific things you want to alert on. I don't know if you have anything to add, Joe.
How would you consume these alerts? How did they end up? How do we?
Yes. So you'd have to configure that in the contact points section to tell it how to actually send you an alert. I think you can do email, you can do Slack, just kind of got a little bit of everything. And the GitHub README page goes through all of this, how you set this up. So should be perfect. Just give that, just consult that if you are interested.
So let's go take a look at that here. Where's the link to that sucker? Qumulo Monitoring Dashboard. Yeah, so get all the info how to do this. Now, we also have another project in our GitHub that you might have played with, which is Qumulo Alerts. And it kind of fits a parallel need for it. Same kind of purpose, a parallel purpose to it. You can get, you can also use this system, but if we're talking about the going through the OpenMetrics monitoring system, then that would be the way Porter just talked about.
Yeah, and if you're not using Prometheus and Grafana, then whatever monitoring system you're using has some way of setting up alerts. And so anything that we produce metrics on is something that you can alert on.
That's great. We have another customer question here. It says, can you trigger alerts for quotas being exceeded?
We don't currently produce metrics for quotas, but that is something that is coming up in the future. And so you will be able to do that.
The Qumulo Alerts project does trigger on quotas because it uses a different endpoint to pull this information. This guy goes in the OpenMetrics one monitors more of the overall info. This guy goes into a little bit more detailed info, so you kind of use the both of them together. But if we're looking at the Qumulo Alerts, leave this one will alert on quotas and things like that.
Yeah, I believe that's right.
Yeah. Now we intend to host a future webinar coming up very shortly, probably the next 2 weeks, that will go into detail about Qumulo Alerts and how to work in conjunction with OpenMetrics and with trends. A lot of you have login access to trends. So you'd have all these different ways to really keep a very close look on your Qumulo clusters. Yeah, Matt has a comment on Q&A. So he's using Qumulo Alerts and it works well. Yeah, it does. It's a really cool project. Mike Cade will be joining us. He spent a bunch of time working on that. And it's really cool how we get so much access to all your different, all the stuff that's going on with your cluster. Is anyone on the webinar right now? Have you gone through the process of setting up this node Qumulo dashboards? Is anyone there? actually have this up and running. Cool. Looks like one or two people got it set up. So let's see, can we make our own dashboard in here? So what's a metric that we're not seeing up here? And one thing to note too is that the information that we have related to the hardware and the information that we have related to what's actually happening with the protocols on a cluster, they don't necessarily have to exist in two different dashboards. You can mix and match them. All these OpenMetric endpoints are available in any given place. So you can take the dashboard that we kind of created for you and you can just completely modify it to your taste and just have the information that you are interested in. And I believe Grafana also gives you the ability to show only certain dashboards to certain users. So you could have this running on your network management center with just some information up there, and then you can have your own login that you have more detailed information. Again, Grafana is a pretty deep monitoring or visualization system. You got quite a few options in there. So if I could create some, kind of start typing Qumulo, all our endpoints end up. Now start with Qumulo, and let's see. Endures percent, that's already listed. We basically added almost everything up to the dashboard, so it's not a whole lot that I can add that's not already up there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, our dashboard is actually currently up to date with every metric that we publish. There is some kind of visualization of each one. And as we add metrics in the future, we'll update this dashboard. So if you upgrade your Qumulo and you see in the release notes that there's some new metrics that are exciting for you, check back on the GitHub project, and it's probably there already in the dashboard, ready for you to make use of. So you'd want to pull down the most recent version of the GitHub project to get access to that.
And when you do that, do you have to back up your Prometheus database? What does that look like?
You should be able to just pull the most recent version using Git and restart the Docker container. I believe.
And it's do we have that documented on the thing?
Probably.
Cool. And in Prometheus itself, I'm assuming there's a way for us to back this up. We want to save this database somewhere, but I guess we'll have to take a look at the documentation and see how to do that. Cool. Any other questions from you guys out there? All right. So as always, please feel free to reach out to us on Slack via email. We'll be glad to pop in and kind of help you get this up and running. And look forward to seeing what kind of dashboards you guys put together. If you come up with some really cool visualizations, we'll love to see it. If you end up using something that is not Grafana and Prometheus, I think we'd be really interested in seeing this. I know we have some people using Datadog, and it'd be kind of cool to see that popping up in other types of monitoring stacks. But other than that, I think I'll give you guys back your 15 minutes and see you online. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you.